Hello, everyone. I welcome everyone to be here. Today, we have a great speaker who's going to talk about security, named Simon Binder. He's a lead architect at Advania Knowledge Factory. And I leave it up to him to introduce himself better. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. So can we turn off the music, even though it's good music? Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, good, you're awake. Fantastic. I think the lunch today was great, and I'm from Sweden. We'll talk more about that later on. But it's always fun to be in the US and have lunch at conferences because it's always the same thing. It's one Mexican, it's one American, it's one Italian. And now when they had enchiladas, that's the first time like since 2014 where they mix it up. So go Denver, thank you. Where are we? There we go. So today, I will start by going through a number of concepts together that might be new or feel hard to grasp for some of you, so that we all have the same kind of understanding of the concepts that I will be referring to for the rest of the presentation. And after that, I will give you my view on how to reason around combining Jamf's security solutions with Microsoft XDR and other Microsoft solutions. Let's see. I'm a little behind. There we go. And I will introduce myself soon, so don't worry about that. And finally, we will explore how we can automate detection and response across Jamf and Microsoft, ensuring the most efficient cross-platform solutions with maintained visibility. And once you leave this room today, I hope that you have level set your security knowledge, that you can come back to your organizations and actually understand the abbreviations that I will talk about shortly. And also, so that you can be on level with many of the vendors that are here today and that you meet in your daily line of work, so that when they throw themselves with different kinds of names or abbreviations, you will understand what they're actually referring to and understand if you need that solution or not. I will also explain and share how you can overcome some of the common challenges and objections that you will hear from your security teams, especially if they, like I am, comes from a Microsoft background. And many of the topics that we'll talk about today, even though I will talk about Jamf and Microsoft, will be applicable to many other security products that you might run in your organizations today. And finally, I will show you how you can leverage and orchestrate a couple of these mentioned security solutions, and both to give you a better understanding of the value they bring, but also how you do basics operations within them. And for the ones that haven't seen me before, because this is my 6th time at JNUC, and I'm super happy to be back. I always enjoy to be here, and it's one of the conferences that I always highlight to my peers, regardless if they're on the Microsoft side or somewhere else, as one of the conferences that I just simply can't miss every year. So I'm the lead architect at Advania Knowledge Factory, based out of Sweden. Advania is an Icelandic consultancy company. We do MSP, we do resell, we do kind of everything. And I'm leading the Microsoft specialist consulting part of Advania in Sweden, but work across the Nordics and the UK. And you will be getting my contact details at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I hope that I will have time to answer them later on today during this session. Otherwise, I have a brain date later today where you are more than welcome to join and ask any questions you might have, or just catch me anytime during the event. You will be getting my social media information at the end of the session, so just ping me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to meet up and have a discussion around your environment if that's something you would like. You will be getting the slides. You will have absolutely no use of them, but you can use them later on if you like. And like I said, you will be getting my contact details at the end of the session. Okay? So, a couple of questions. So now it's time to wake up. It will be hard questions. It will test your honesty, mostly, and not your knowledge. How many in this room can honestly say that what these words mean and what the purpose of the tools behind them or the concepts are? Perfect. Then we're going to have a really good 40 minutes more. And I thank you for your honesty. How many of your colleagues or the vendors you talk about assume that you know these abbreviations? Yeah, many of you. And how many of you think that the vendors you speak to actually know what they're talking about? Not a single person. Good. Then we're complete level set. You answered exactly the way I anticipated you to do. So we'll start off by explaining these concepts and what they are. On each slide, and you will soon recognize how they look, I will have the abbreviation, what it stands for. I will talk a little bit about it. There will be some smaller text at the bottom. You do not have to read that. That's just the longer explanation that a certain generative AI gave me to complement whatever I'm saying. But when you get the slides, you can read it if you so desire. But we'll start with the first one. SOC, a Security Operations Center. And it's always fun when you ask a generative AI, I'm speaking at an Apple conference. Could you explain this concept in a way that Apple engineers would understand? So the way ChatGPT or Copilot in this case explained it were, this is the genius bar for cybersecurity. I'm not really convinced about that. But a Security Operations Center, it's usually you say that it consists of people, process, and technology. This is where everything comes together, where you have people that understand the tools you're using and what kind of information they are showing to you. They then make decisions on if they should investigate or remediate something. And this is where the personal, like the human side of cybersecurity comes into play. This is something you can buy, it's something you can build. Very few organizations have the capability to do that. And I'm happy to talk more about that before. I've built these kinds of solutions at vendors previously. And you don't necessarily need to have one. But I see a higher and higher demand for a cybersecurity or a security operations center at my customers nowadays. We had some questions about that at the Partner Summit yesterday as well. But this is what we're referring to. So you can buy a SOC, you can build a SOC, but it's not a product as such. Then we have SOAR, a security orchestration, automation, and response tool. This is a tool, and we'll look into the way that Microsoft is doing this today, because they really don't have a SOAR as such. Many other security vendors have it. What it does is really that it looks into the data that the products we're going to talk about soon shows it. And based on logic that you have set up, or if they have some kind of AI or machine learning algorithm in the background, it will take some kind of action based on that information. A simple way of saying it, or like explaining what it's doing, is that say that you see that you have some kind of malware on a device. A SOAR would then look at the malware and try to figure out, okay, how can I best remediate this? It might isolate the device, it might remove certain files, but it's basically doing the work that people are doing in the SOC. Most times, a SOC and a SOAR are integrated, so that whenever you learn something from the people that work in your SOC, they can then put that into a SOAR and automate it the next time, so they don't have to do it. They can focus more on investigations, as an example, or building new automation in here. And this is something that I will show you later on, how you can do with code, leveraging both Microsoft and Jamf signals. And just because some of you found it kind of amusing, when I asked ChatGPT, I don't even understand it, but SOAR is like shortcut apps for your SOC. I don't know if that is accurate, but, and AI is supposedly taking our jobs. We then have an XDR, and this is something, an abbreviation I think you have heard a lot of times. The challenge with this is that different vendors look at this very differently. So if you ask Microsoft and Cisco as an example, they will have complete opposite views of what an XDR is and what the next product or solution I will talk about is. But an XDR is an extended detection and response capability. This is where you combine different signals. So think of it as a single pane of glass for, in the Jamf case, Jamf Security Cloud, Protect, all the security signals that you're collecting, that creates a combined solution that you can look at. In my opinion, Jamf doesn't have an XDR, and I don't think that Jamf wants to have an XDR either. They are focusing on the Apple products and the identities connected to it. Very few of the security companies out there have a real XDR that is their own. Microsoft, that we'll talk about today, in my opinion, has one, because they have the identity side, they have the collaboration security in Office 365, they have the identity, they have the endpoints. That combined creates this extended detection and response. And in my opinion, this is what we should try to implement in our organizations. And therefore, we'll talk about that later, we need to combine the products that Jamf has with something else to ensure that we get this XDR feeling. Some might ask then, okay, but we have heard about EDR, so endpoint detection and response for a while. That's what Jamf Protect is. That looks only on the endpoints and what's happening there, and that means that you might miss out on things that happens in the identity side or in the collaboration side of your environment. But there are ways to sort that out. And this is probably the worst analogy that Copilot found for me. XDR is like Find My plus iCloud plus Screen Time plus Apple Watch alerts, and all rolled into one for security. I don't know. So, since Copilot is terribly bad at this, I will try to make a joke in English. Because we're going into SIEM, and a SIEM is where you store your logs. Yeah, it worked, sort of. Yeah. I'm from the west coast of Sweden. We have the most terrible humor in the world. I'm also a dad, so I make bad dad jokes, west coast style in Sweden. But I'm kind of pleased with this. Yeah, I know I have a very low bar. A SIEM is a security information and event management system. So it's actually a place where you combine all of your logging. This is where you might put logs from your XDR together with logs from a firewall or from a threat intelligence source, or as we'll look at, combine different logs from various security solutions to have them in one place. That means that you can create and have that full visibility over your environment from a security point of view. This is something that you do have to be somewhat careful with, because most SIEMs out there are charged on the amount of data you store and how long you want to retain that data. So here you have to have a discussion on what data is actually valuable, and we'll talk more about that later on. But this is something that I encourage you to have, mainly because you get that full visibility regardless of which security products you use, but also that you get that ability to look back in time. An XDR will usually only look at the closest 30 to 90 days. But there might be situations, and I've been involved in security incidents where that has been the place, where the attacker has actually been within the environment for up to 2 years before they actually executed the attack. And if you only rely on an XDR, you might not have the full picture of that attack, and it's very, very hard to do an investigation and telling someone that, yeah, we see that something started to happen here, day 90, but we have no clue what the attacker did before that. And if you look at it from a compliance point of view, which me and Brian will talk more about tomorrow, that is simply not acceptable for a lot of organization or law enforcement. And I don't think Copilot, and SIEM is like console.app on steroids. I'm not worried about AI. Then the last piece we'll talk about before we head into the actual integrations is KQL. And this might not be something that you will have to be familiar with. It's only applicable really if you are going to use some kind of Microsoft security product. This is custom query language. For the ones of you that have worked with databases before, you will feel right at home here. It's a scripting language that allows us to do queries on the data that we have in our logging solutions. This is what Microsoft is standardizing on, both for Azure and their security solutions. And a lot of other security vendors have also gone down the KQL path, but not all of them. So this is a language we'll talk about more later in this session, but it's something that you need to be aware of and understand and be able to use before you head into what we'll talk about soon, which is integrating Jamf security solutions with Microsoft Defender XDR. If you don't understand or are able to use KQL, you won't be getting the full benefit from combining all of this into the SIEM that we'll look into later on. And the last very bad analogy here would be that KQL is like Spotlight search with scripting powers. So now I promise you no more Copilot, no more bad AI jokes, no more bad dad jokes. Let's get into the actual thing you're here for. So how many of you are in a situation where this is an actual discussion going on within your organizations? I will raise my hand too. How many of you work for partners to Jamf or within like an IT consultancy organization, a couple of you. The poor people that manages internal IT for IT consultants, they must have made a very bad choice of work at some point. But that's an ongoing discussion that we have. But in my opinion, should it really be a versus in between these? And to me, there are very few places where they collide. The obvious two ones are we have Defender for endpoint. That's obviously a competitor to Jamf Protect, even though I recommend and prefer to use Protect on Mac and on iOS. But they are competitors because they're looking at the same thing on the devices. They're searching for the same kind of signals where they want to find if we're under attack or not. The other part is where we have the trust or safe internet versus Entra public or private access, where you have a proxy solution to look into web traffic and try to understand if that's malicious or not, or just unhealthy for you. But looking at everything else, they are very complementary. And as I see it, Protect have some really unique upsides compared to Defender on the Apple platform. So that's why we're here. But what are the challenges? And the first thing is what I've already started to talk about. What should we run on each device? Because many, especially if you build your own SOC, so your own security operations center, they of course want to have as few tools as possible to look at. They don't want to learn about more than one tool if they so desire. If you're an MSP doing it, you might be required to do so. But in my opinion, we should be focusing on, this is something we invest in terms of security. This is what we rely on to ensure that our organization is secure. And therefore, in my opinion, we should be using the most suited EDR on each of the platforms. So where we would use Jamf Protect or the equivalent for iOS within that part of the organization, and then we can run Defender and everything else. It's all good. But then the question comes, how should the SOC then handle these two different tools? And I will talk more about that shortly. But in my opinion, again, we should be looking at one single pane of glass. If that is your SIEM or something that you put on top of it, or if it's a combination of SIEM and SOAR, then we don't really need to care what happens below that, the actual endpoint solutions, because the data will be surfaced to the SOC in one single pane of glass. Where and how do we do efficient response? How do we get visibility? How do we get reporting? And of course, the obvious question about cost. And I find it kind of interesting that we are still at the point where we understand that cybersecurity is important, but most organizations aren't willing to invest what's needed in that. I work with my home municipality now, which is like, it's fantastic. What I do actually impacts the day for my wife who works within the municipality, my daughter who goes to school within the municipality. My tax money is affected by what I do at work. It's an honor to be doing that. And that organization have had challenges over the years, financial challenges and other challenges from an IT point of view, so that we're now trying to catch up on that. And of course, that's costly. But I think we need to understand more about the threats towards our organizations before we start yelling about cost. And we'll get into that soon. But how can we first and foremost overcome these challenges we've talked about? And the first and obvious thing is that regardless if you choose to use Protect, which again, I recommend, your SOC and your technicians need to understand the Apple ecosystem. So start by training them on Apple and the threats against the Apple platform before you start looking into what tool we should be using. Because if they understand more about the platform, they will also understand the strengths that Protect will give them, which they won't understand if they only look at it from a Windows point of view. Because the platforms, as I've said at every single session I've done at JNUC, are very different in the way that Apple versus Microsoft looks at them from a security point of view. So start by helping your SOC or your security team, if you don't have a SOC, understanding what you are actually working with every single day. Once they understand that, you can have another discussion. But if they aren't trained on the Apple platform, then Defender won't help them either, because they still won't have a clue about what's actually going on, what is Defender surfacing to them. The other part is that we need to look into centralized logging and response. We need to have that single pane of glass for visibility, for logging, and for automation. If we have a very strong layer when it comes to the visibility and the automation, it doesn't matter what we have below. And that's the benefit to your organization, because then you are able to change the underlying solutions like your EDR or your identity protection solutions and still have the same overlay. That's exactly the way we do business at my company. We focus entirely on that layer, and we don't really care about what our customers run in terms of EDR, because we have built the overlaying intelligence, and whatever information is surfaced will be handled at that layer, translated into the automation and the visibility that we have built. I think it's also important that you think about what matters to you and your security team. Is it simplicity, or is it the best possible protection / user experience that matters? Because yes, it's of course simpler to have one solution that are highly integrated, but it might not be the best solution. So it's about looking into, if you're going to buy any kind of product, do you want the product that's easiest to use, or the product that produces the best result? And are you then prepared to do a little more work to reach that higher level of security? Because that is, within my opinion, what you are getting. But also, regardless of what you choose, integrate and automate. This is where we have the SIEM, where we have all the logs, and on top of that we have the SOAR, which looks at the logs and do some kind of automation on top of it. But also train your SOC on the platforms and how to do this automation and integration, not just focusing on the cool things that you see on TV where they are doing forensics or doing like ethical hacking. They also need to understand code today, integrations. That's what I'm super excited about the Jamf API announcements, because that will help us immensely in terms of building automation for security, but also for other solutions. And on that, we'll start to go into the actual integration and automation. This is how I help my customers integrating Jamf and Microsoft together. And this is what I hope that we'll see more integrations on in the future. But we'll start by talking about one important concept. As you might remember, we talked about the SIEM and how you usually buy them, and that's based on the amount of data you store and how much data you have. How many of you have been part of some kind of monitoring project, like monitoring servers or applications or something? How many of you have done that at some point? Yeah, a few of you. What is the, in my experience, and see if we agree on that, what is the most common mistake that organizations that try to implement monitoring does from the start? Any suggestions? Oh, it's fine. In my experience, they collect all the logs. Every single log they can possibly find, and most of them are absolutely useless. It will only create a lot of red lights within whatever console they're using. And the way IT works is that if we have 100 red lights when we start monitoring, that's our baselines. We just close everything. We'll close all the incidents, and then we're done. We have put all of the worries behind us, and we still have a terribly bad environment, but we simply don't see it. So when I talk about gathering all the available data in one place, I don't think you should have all the available data. But you should look at it from a quality point of view. You should have all the data from the sources you actually can use, get good visibility, do automations on. So ensure that you have quality more than quantity, and build on top of that. I will be showing you how to integrate the Jamf products with Microsoft data as well. But usually when I do these implementations with only Microsoft products, I don't take all the data from those products. I select very few sources so that my customers are able to actually leverage it from the start and not overcommit and overcomplicate things. So ensure that you understand the data you want to inject into your SIEM and that you understand how to work with it. And once you have built solutions around it, then you can start to add more solutions. What I always will emphasize is that very, very few organizations have the need to send all of their traffic logs from their firewalls to a SIEM, which is something that's very common because the networking teams want to show that, yeah, we had 1 billion different connections today. Yeah, out of which 1 were actually malicious, and we see that in the EDR. So be careful with the data you ingest. But we'll head into the screenshots. And don't worry, I hope that my animations in Zoom will work here soon, so you don't have to put your Zoom on yourself. So if we look at the work that Jamf had done together with Microsoft, I think it's one of the most simplistic solutions that you actually can integrate into Microsoft Sentinel. Microsoft Sentinel is Microsoft's SIEM. And that's what I will be basing a lot of this on. Sentinel, in my opinion, is one of the most flexible solutions out there. It's cloud only, so if that's a challenge for your organization, a lot of the things that I will talk about today is still applicable to any other on-prem solution like Splunk or things like that. It's just a different way of doing the queries and the automation later on. But if we look at how we are doing this from Protect, it's basically a setting. You need to do some additional configurations first within your Entra ID. This is something that is well documented, and that if you are not the one managing Entra, you can get that assistance from whoever manages Entra within your organization. It will create a very locked down environment for them. So these apps and the application IDs that we'll use will only be able to read data from your Jamf solution and only push that data to Sentinel. So what we have here is the directory ID, which is basically my tenant ID, my Entra ID. I have the application that I want it to connect to and the endpoint which will collect the data. What I like about the way that Jamf has done this integration is that you can be very specific in terms of what you want to send to Sentinel. So if you only want to do alerts, so if you get an alert into Protect, you only want to raise that within Sentinel, because that in turn will raise it in Defender XDR. You don't have to send any other information, but your SOC team will understand that, hey, we have an alert in Protect, we see it in a single pane of glass, send whoever is capable of managing that alert into Protect and handle it that way. That's the simplest way of having that integration, so you at least surface all the alerts in one place. You also have different kinds of logging solutions available within this data collector, so where it will pass on all kinds of logs that you have configured within Protect and send them over to Sentinel, so you can get that raw data that Protect creates for you and which will be used later on in this session. Within the telemetry side of Protect, we are also able to configure more specifically what kind of information that we want this connector to send over. So if I only want the alerts, this is actually not usable or not applicable. But if I want to send all the logs, I can select just to get applications and processes, access and authentication. It depends on what I want to highlight in Sentinel and what I'm able to take actions on. In this example, I've sent all the logs, because in my environment, all the logs is very few logs, so it doesn't really matter from a cost point of view. If you're cost conscious, consider looking into what you actually need to send based on what you want to automate. There might be things that you, together with Protect and Pro, are more able to actually respond to using that platform, and where you wouldn't need to use Sentinel and the automation tools we'll be looking into later on. But there might be other things that you want to emphasize here. I would say that the authentication side is one thing that I would like to add to Sentinel to complement the Entra logs that I also will have there later on. But you are fully flexible in this, and that's something that I find very unique with Protect. Many other XDRs or EDRs will just send everything they have, and that will create a data overflow for you. Sorry. And you also have other options with the different plans we have in Protect and also with the unified logging. The unified logging is where you can add additional logs from your devices. That is something that I would encourage you to do at a later stage, because those logs won't be as effective as the ones that we have in Protect. This will be very raw logs from your endpoints, and that usually just creates a lot of noise, which you won't have any need for, and increase the cost of whatever solution you have. So this is how you set it up on the Protect side. It's, in my opinion, very well documented. On the Sentinel side, I think this is the old one. You can actually get the Sentinel part of this, and we'll talk a little bit about how Sentinel works later on. But you can get it from the Azure Marketplace. It's very easy to deploy, and that will also help you through a guide set this up on the Sentinel side, so you then can take that information and input it into Protect the way I showed previously. It's important to understand that Sentinel is a solution on top of Azure Monitor or Log Analytics. So when your Azure team, if you're not the one setting this up, configures this, they first need to do a couple of things within Azure to make the underlying platform work. Then you add the Sentinel solution on top of Log Analytics. That is where you get all of the security intelligence that we expect from a SIEM. And then we add various connectors to it that will fill Sentinel with some kind of intelligence. We'll look into the analytics rules later on in the queries and the workbooks. We're here to talk about the integration, so I won't go into detail into how Sentinel works, but you are fully capable of adding new intelligence, new solutions, both from Microsoft, from Jamf, and from the community to your Sentinel workspace, and therefore also copy and paste with pride from others that have done the similar kinds of automations that you want within this. And I would also say that Sentinel today is one of the most capable SIEMs out there. It has improved a lot over the years. And one of the things that the people that I work with that works in SOCs really highlights with Sentinel is the performance. That if you have your SIEM on-prem, you need to have a lot of servers to actually make it performant. But here you have access to the public cloud. So whenever you do a very heavy query, which we'll look into later on, you will still have a rather responsive solution, which in my opinion also gives you a lot of security benefits if things happen directly and not after 30 minutes. When we head into Sentinel, as you might see here, we have started to do some KQL queries, and we'll soon get into that. We have now in Sentinel tables filled with data from the various Jamf security solutions. The tables are what holds the data, and for us to be able to leverage these, we need to do something to extract the data that's actually valuable to us. That's where we have KQL. So you will have a very, very short KQL school. I'm not the best KQL person out there. There are a lot of really good resources online if you want to learn more about this. And it's a skill in itself. If you have a data background, are used to leveraging the equivalent in SQL, you will be feeling right at home with KQL. But it's a relatively simple language to understand, which you will see soon. So this is an example of a query where I, in this case, are looking into the Entra logs that I have in my SIEM. Basically, we can see that we are looking into a table. That's the first line where we have sign-in logs. We'll see later how we do that with Jamf. Then we filter it on a result type where we'll look into if it's not a successful sign-in. That's happened within the last 7 days. Count how many times that user have failed over the last 7 days, and then sort it based on how many counts of failed logins. So relatively simplistic to read, and something that I'm certain that all of you will be way more capable of handling than I am. But in this case, we see that I have 2 accounts, tenant admin at penguinsrock.se, that have failed many, many times. And then you have my regular account that have failed 5 times in the last 7 days. So when we start with KQL, we need to understand some of the operators. You will, as I said, be getting these slides. These are actually kind of useful for once when it comes to my slides. But where we have things like where, summarize, join, extend, project, parse, which we do to either filter or present the data that we get out from these different tables. So this is usually how we operate when it comes to KQL queries, that we first get some kind of data. We need to base the data on something, which is usually a single table. We'll get into join later on, because that's also where we can enhance the data that we get from either Microsoft or Jamf and tie them together. But we first get some kind of data, we filter it to get what we actually want or need. We summarize it, so where we select what we want to use in terms of the data, because the less data we have in our query at the end of the day, the more efficient it will be. We sort it somehow if we need to, and then we select the data we want to actually see or use in the next step, which is usually a SOAR solution. So with this structure, you will be able to do some kind of advanced queries. We'll show a couple of very simple ones later on. But that's the structure, and then it's just about understanding the data you have. We also have joins, and this, I have friends who are DBAs, and joins is apparently one of the most beautiful things you can work with if you understand them, which is somewhat challenging. But what we're trying to do here is that we have sign-in logs. Again, I'm using Entra logs as an example, where the result is 0, so we have a failed sign-in attempt. But then we want to take information from another table, which in this case is identity info. And to put this into the perspective of Jamf, this might be a place where you see that from Protect, you have data that shows that a certain user have signed in on their Mac. And they are doing something that might be malicious. Then you can use a join to gather more information from the equivalent sign-in logs in Entra or from other solutions that your identity provider might have, tie that together with the logs we have from Protect, and actually show a combined view of those two tools when we present it in a report or when we do some kind of automation. So what we're doing here is that we, on user principal name, we use the user principal name in this example as the key. We will take the user principal name, the department, and the job title, join that together with the sign-in logs information, and then project these things together. When was this event taking place? Which user, which department, which title, and which location? Combining different tables into one result. And if we understand how to use this with Protect and Defender XDR, we can actually enhance the information on both sides. In the slides, you have some links to places which I find really interesting from a KQL point of view. So I encourage you to download the slides later on. And if you can't find how to download the slides, reach out to me and I'm happy to send them to you. We can, in addition to just do these queries, which we'll show later on in terms of automation, we can actually also do some visualizations within Sentinel. I would say that that's not the most common way that I do the visualization, but that's something you could use if you want to give your SOC or your CISO an overview of what's happening in their environment at this point. So we won't focus too much on how to configure everything within Protect and Pro and in XDR in terms of automation. I will show you an example now on how I've made an automation based on something that happens on a device. So what will be taking place here is that, let's see where we start. This is an example of where I have, and if you have seen my sessions before, you know that stolen devices is part of my compliance rule set within Pro. So in this case, I have my Jamf URL, I have a group name and a group ID inside of a PowerShell script. I've also created a function app within Azure, which will be doing my automation, my SOAR solution within Azure. And to authenticate to that, I have Key Vault, which is the identity solution you usually leverage within Azure to do automation. Then I have an API call, which will be populated by the group ID and group name, and also the serial number. And in this case, I've hard-coded the group ID and the group name within this script because I only want this to happen for a certain group, which in this case are stolen devices. But the serial number is something that I will gather or collect from first Protect through Sentinel, which is then sent into this automation. So to make this all work is that something happens in Protect, some kind of event for a device. That raises an alert within Sentinel. So let's say that we have some kind of alert in Protect. It raises an alert into Sentinel. Sentinel will then look at that alert and say, hey, if I see this alert, I've been instructed to send an HTTP request. In my case, in this example, I've actually hard-coded the serial number as well, over here. But up here, the URI, that's my actual script that I showed you previously within the function app. So Protect discovers something, sends that information to Sentinel. A logic app creates or triggers an automation where I can take an HTTP request with, in this case, a serial number, and pass that on to my trigger. That will be using the Jamf APIs, putting that device into a smart group, or a static group in this case, and then something else will happen on the other side. So this is an example of how we can take information from the Jamf side, send it all the way through our regular processes that your SOC might be using today, and push it back into Pro. Still having that full, complete visibility, leveraging tools that any SOC should be sufficient in using today, and where you don't really have to care if the devices are running Defender or Protect, because these things are something a SOC should be able to understand and leverage regardless what kind of security solution you use. And the data that Jamf sends into Sentinel is actually in a format that Sentinel understands. That's one of the investments that Jamf have made together with Microsoft, that the data is something that you can leverage out of the box. But then you might be required to do some KQL queries in addition to find the exact data and surface the exact information you want to your SIEM, and in this case, Microsoft's SOAR system. So to summarize, when you choose your security solutions, ensure that you make informed decisions. Because when it comes to security, there's a lot of emotions involved. You will have people that will die on the hill of Defender, even though we know that Protect is what's actually best for the Apple side of things. So ensure that you actually compare. We're actually doing, this is unfortunately recorded, so I can't tell you exactly what we're doing. We are doing comparisons within my company between Protect and Defender on mobile. And let's just say that one of them doesn't see anything, and the other one sees everything. And then you can ask your CISO what they would prefer. It's important to understand that I don't see any problem whatsoever in integrating Jamf security products with Microsoft security products. It fits perfectly together thanks to Sentinel and the automation that I see on the Microsoft side. There are obviously other solutions that can create the same kind of integration, but there are a lot of solutions out there that will perfectly enable you to combine the best of the Jamf side and the Microsoft side into one. And then reach the peak, or it should have said elevate. I'm sorry. Sorry, marketing at Jamf. I didn't know about Elevate until today, so it's updated until my session tomorrow. But I think with these two solutions together, we will be able to reach new heights in terms of security, cross-platform within your organization. So now you have been given a level set. I hope that you now feel a little more comfortable when you hear these different abbreviations. You have been given some suggestions on how we can overcome these challenges. Please find me later on if you want to discuss more about your specific organization. And you have been given a very simplistic example on how you can orchestrate Jamf and Microsoft together using tools that any security organization out there should be able to leverage and get most of the use from. Any defender out there needs to have multiple different components to counter the attacks in the different domains and against different targets. Each of these are experts in the respective domain, but they might have different view on how to solve an assignment or counter a threat. We need to create a strong defense And we need to do that by leveraging the capabilities between the experts in each respective field to triage, to communicate, and to be humble at some times. Someone else might do a job better. And that's how I see Jamf and Microsoft and other vendors for the matter working together in the cyber domain. If we and you and our colleagues can agree on a few common tools, SIEM and SOAR in particular, we can integrate the best for Apple devices with the best for other platforms and benefit from it all. And I know that security people might be very stubborn, narrow-minded, and I have a word here that I just invented, but I can't even pronounce it. So we might need to convince them about that this is the better for all of us, and focus on visibility, automation, and integration. And that is definitely possible to achieve with Microsoft, with Jamf, and the subject matters we have on Apple. So when, not if, you take this to the next step in your organization's security journey, you will be stronger than ever before. Thank you so much. Sorry for running over time. If you have any questions, please find me during the event or reach out to me. Have a great rest of JNUC.
Thank you, Simon. If there's still one spot left for his brain date in 40 minutes by now, so if you want to join that, you can. Have a great rest of the day.
I also have stickers, if someone wants knee-deep in tech stickers. I have shiny ones, I have black and white ones. So if you want stickers, I have plenty up here. Enjoy the rest of your day and week.